For more resources, visit rymonline.org.
The Local Youth Worker is a daily podcast that's centered on 5 questions each week. Ranging from the practical to the professional, we're looking for answers to the questions you're asking. Whether you're in full-time, part-time, or even volunteer youth ministry, this podcast is for you.
Hello everyone, this is John Parrott, and you're listening to The Local Youth Worker, a daily podcast presented by Reformed Youth Ministries. If you're new to the show, I'll ask our guests 5 questions each day, and our podcast will center on one question, focus on one question each day. We might have some sub-questions and follow-up questions, but we want this to be a brief podcast that gets to the point and concise answers to questions you're probably asking. Today's guest is Reverend Nate Smith. Nate, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for making the time. He is the associate pastor at River Oaks Presbyterian Church in Germantown, Tennessee. And is that the exact title that you go by, or is it associate to families?
That's it. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Good to have you. And we ask 5 basic questions of youth workers typically, but we're going to go in a little different direction today with Nate. And so before we actually get into the question, why don't you just tell us where you're from originally, your family, children, all that
Yeah, so I originally grew up in Denver, Colorado, and moved around about every 3 to 7 years. My father was a Southern Baptist minister. Got married to a young lady in Texas, and we've had 4 kids, and our oldest is now in high school, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So when I went into ministry right out of seminary. Went to seminary a year after getting out of college, so just kind of been in ministry my whole life.
Yeah. And where did you go to seminary again?
Went to Covenant Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri.
That's right. Okay. Good deal. Well, as I said, we're going in a little bit of a different direction today with the podcast. And so really, my first question is, Nate, would you mind just sharing your story with us? I know we've had you come and speak at our church about some of this. And
Yes.
So I'll just let you answer that.
I'd be glad to. Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was a pastor. Mom and dad were both Christians, believers, and grew up hearing the good news, the gospel. But at the age of 8, two very significant things happened. One, as I trusted Jesus as my Lord and Savior, walked the aisle, got baptized, and within like literally 2 weeks, was exposed by a young man in the neighborhood to some pornography. And it really set up this struggle within me of, that was something that was hidden.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really understand. All I knew is, like, on one hand, like, I knew I needed Jesus and a Savior, and on the other hand, this whole new thing had been introduced. Being a male, women were becoming more attractive as I was growing up, but then there was this pornography that just is an imprint on me.
And was this a magazine somebody brought to you?
It was a magazine. Just a neighbor kid got his dad's Playboy and was just showing it to kids in the neighborhood. Didn't have any guidance. My parents never had any sort of sex talk with us. I like to say it comically that they told my brother, if you get a girl pregnant, they'll kill him. And he basically passed that along to me.
That's some good advice.
Which was, it is good advice, but so short and so lean towards someone who is, as I've learned, a sexual being, a male. And so what really happened is I found a few avenues of pornography, whether it was TV or like the blacked out or the fuzzy, snowy cable channels, at my grandparents' house, and just started to feed it. And I think because I didn't know what to do with it, there was a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. Not having any instruction from the church or from my parents, it just became something I struggled with on my own. And again, the result was lots of shame and lots of guilt.
Wow.
And I can remember in junior high and high school, just very dark moments, thinking, like, if I get discovered, I'm going to be like publicly humiliated, and I'm the only one who has this problem.
Yeah.
And again, there was just no talk. There was no discussion. There was no conversation from adults about it. And I remember one time I finally kind of opened up to my dad, because our youth pastor did mention the word lust. And I started to figure out, I have a lust problem. And I remember asking my dad about it, and he just kind of gave an answer of like, yeah, you shouldn't do that. And that didn't help. I just brought more shame and more guilt. But God in his goodness sent me to Texas A&M, just providence of moving and whatnot. Ended up at Texas A&M University. And after a fall of trying to be in the cadet corps, I got out of that really due to like just this legalism that I had formed. So, a lot of times when you can't fix yourself, you just try to control your outward circumstances. And I got really good at thinking that I was okay with God because I didn't drink or smoke. I didn't ever have sex with my girlfriend or anything like that. And the cadet corps college really just brought my legalism to visibility.
Wow.
And I couldn't handle the result of that. So I got out of the cadet corps, and literally the day that happened, 2 guys from Campus Crusade met me and shared the gospel with me. And I got the answers right. But the answer that followed after, Jesus is my Savior and I'll go to heaven to be with him, they said, well, are you sharing that with anybody? And I had to humbly just be like, no, I'm not. Like, I'm sharing with people how bad they are and that they don't do the right thing. They're not following God's rules. But I didn't share the gospel. And the group of men that came around me in Campus Crusade started to talk about sex, started to talk about pornography, and started to talk about lust. And they talked about it in a way that inserted God's grace into it. That I am a man, I have desires, I'm a sexual creature, that I want to be with a woman, that I want to have sex is a good thing. And yet the context, especially pornography, it's killing me. It's literally killing my soul and my desires for God and for good. And my response of legalism is especially ugly. And so the gospel of grace just really began to rescue me in college. And just weekly hanging out with guys my age and also these older men who admitted to their struggle and were honest was so refreshing. And I really started to rest for the first time, I think, in this area. Now I wasn't all of a sudden like free of the struggle. I didn't stop looking at porn all of a sudden and never desiring to look at it again. But I started to struggle in the light and to fight back with grace as opposed to law. And so the struggle continued, and I went on into seminary, and it continued there. And before I went to seminary, I got engaged. Before I got engaged, I was very honest with my wife-to-be about the struggle that I had. And she was accepting of that and wanted to help fight in that.
Now, curious, did somebody encourage you to share that with your wife, or was this just God's grace saying you need to?
I think it really started. I think I just sensed a need going into marriage that she needs to know, because I mean, to be honest, in college, like that became the thing that I would try to encourage other guys about, just kind of this sense of like, okay, I need to help other men in this, and we're struggling, and I just wanted her to know that too. And she actually had an eating disorder, and so there was kind of this commonality of taking God's good creation, sex or food, and making it ultimate, something that I have to have in order to be satisfied, or I have to control in order to be significant. So we kind of bonded in our brokenness, as we like to tell each other. We're both so depraved and we both need Jesus. So that was kind of how it began. But I certainly, in that beginning wasn't fully aware of how deeply pornography affected me. And so there was a lot more work that God needed to do. And so when we got married, I think all men like to think, hey, when you get married, it's going to end. The struggle didn't end. It was still there, and there was still a need for honesty, for boundaries, for taking responsibility for it. And that's where I really had to come clean with my wife about some just deeper heart things, and understanding I think what I really came to see was that God is my ultimate satisfaction, not sex with my wife. All of this is just a picture of the intimacy that I'm to have with Christ. And so I really needed sex to be taken out of this ultimate, like it is the goal, and put as it's a gift.
Yeah.
It's not nothing, it's not everything. It's a profound thing, but ultimately it all points to Christ. And that's, again, just another step in growing to be more like Jesus and putting things in their right place. But I'm here today to tell you the struggle hasn't ended. We as believers, and I as a man, am convinced, and I've had counseling that has helped me to understand this is going to be something that'll go on the rest of my life until I see Jesus. It's one of these inconsolable things, in a sense. I kind of always admire or have a strong connection to Frodo as he's going off to the Grey Havens at the end of Lord of the Rings. He's been wounded by the enemy, and he says, this wound will not heal until I leave this earth, and I got to leave this earth because I can't bear it. And every time I read that, I just weep because I have that deep sense too that I'm deeply wounded and I can't fix it, and Jesus is okay with that. He's going to bring it to completion.
Yeah.
And the more I rest and the more I see that I'm good, not because of what I do, not because I've fixed myself, but because He's my Savior.
Amen.
I can rest another day.
Yeah. Well, Nate, thanks so much for sharing that. I know that takes, just again, by God's grace, a lot of humility just to open up about that. So thanks for sharing that, Nate.
You're welcome, John. My pleasure.